Something I read in A Call to Farms really has sticking with me, which is your analogy with conscientious objectors during, particularly in Woody, at least in Woody's and my memories, the Vietnam War. And your comment that being a conscientious objector was really hard. And doing things the way we're talking about doing them with Bitcoin and other violations of the code of modern finance is not as hard as being a conscientious objector. And you're absolutely right. It is not as difficult. It is easy.
Having actively worked in the space of slow money, which is really this idea of nurture capital, where you're trying to bring together, affection and money. At least for the early stage of slow money, only the people that could write, $10,000 checks or $50,000 checks could really do something meaningful within the space. I saw a comment. Somebody said, "I don't have 50,000 to give away or 50,000 to donate, but you probably have $1." And so the amazing thing about Bitcoin is that it really allows for the capital to be deployed in an affectionate way to support that is happening around the country and around the world, hopefully, to really regenerate the land.
I encourage us to continue what is happening with Bitcoin and other movements, which is granular, small, humble, growing through in a natural the way we think about the way that nature works.
Every farmer that I know has to, more or less in some ways, kind of struggles with this ethical thing of do I do the best that I can do, or do I just stay in business? Because there's not a lot of support around that. And that comes to this contribution piece. And there is a lot about money and the reality of Bitcoin and slow money getting in there, and the capacity for providing choice and discretion to the farmers, because we know that the farm is not just a space that's producing food, it's a wellspring for community and for ecology and change. We know that.
In this moment and in the time we are, where I live in I think, I'm not sure if people know, but I live in northern Minnesota, Aking. We call it the land to which the people belong, Aking. And I basically work in this region, and I'm sitting here in the middle of my village in the wild rice harvest. And the paradigm needs to be different. Our work up here in our region is in building an intertribal hemp cooperative, because in our region, you got millions of acres of tribal land. A lot of it talk about land back. We need our land back. And inside our own reservations, the non-Indian landowners and leaseholders control a lot of our land base. We want to move to an economy where we can buy back our land or get back control.
We did so many mistakes that at the end they became so evident thanks to the COVID. But when everybody was really hoping that we were learning this lesson, the war in Ukraine started. And it means that we didn't learn any lesson, actually. And this is the complete separation between what is the life and what is the finance. And life and finance are really difficult to be put together if we think that whatever mechanisms that works in agriculture, producing food, behave in a way that the market laws would completely not appreciate.
From a money perspective, what's interesting is that, of course, coming from a high-tech background, not knowing one thing about farming, I would say that the first 10 years of my personal experience and journey here was really learning more about the soil and learning about the farming side of things. But what I realize now is that at some level, that's an easier problem to solve than the money side of the problems.
I always say COVID was a guide and a teacher, because it revealed so many things that were there from the very beginning, but now it was so crystallized and so clear that we knew what it is in that abstraction that we could actually tangibly hold, re-engineer, redesign. The instability of the supply chains, the vulnerability that we all felt, created a space for relational re-engineering, to be able to understand that we're part of an ecosystem, even though it's also encumbered by all of these other systems. And that opening really was an opportunity for us to use different language, right? In conjunction with some of the cultural upheavals and ruptures, right? This whole kind of racial equity consciousness started to also be involved in our discussions. And now we're looking at the history kind of laid bare of agriculture in the United States. And as a farmer, I started to see those, and I started to see people opening up, and not just being able to open up their spaces politically at the proverbial table, but also in conversations, creating allies with institutions. And one of the biggest kind of takeaways for me was that, you know, I co-founded a food hub to address food insecurity, basically built on the relationships with food pantries and food banks, who are now a viable market for a lot of local farmers.
And at the present time, at a farmers, we having a little roundtable discussion on exactly the subject we're talking about, how we can better organize ourselves, better access to funding capital to keep these farmers in business. I'm actually right in the middle of the state of Mississippi at a meeting talking about the same thing we're talking about.
There are a few keywords that we have been using during this conversation, which are care, relationship, and affection. And that is really easy to perceive in these days. Schools, the teachers ask for a training course on ecology, the basic learning about ecology, and the same do the churches, and the same do the political party. And this is really something very new, and probably what we need all is a kind of re-education on thinking about money.
And I think that awareness of living in food systems as a palimpsest that can be rewritten, redrawn, creates a multiplicity of opportunities within which we can actually navigate and redirect the flow of capital.
When I think of existential threats to our farm and to our local food system, yes, climate and other things play a big role, but social cohesion at some level, in terms of how that maybe informs a response to climate change, is a big one, and money.
When you're putting the money in the hands of the farmers who are caring for the soils and caring for the land and caring for this environment, it's not just the physical environment, it's the conscious contributing environment that's being created around farms regionally, this sort of decentralized model of economics, decentralized model of infrastructure and of cooperation.
There are like competing urgencies here. There's the urgency to get 100,000 acres of hemp planted, and there's the urgency to rebuild community and create community resilience and rebuild relationships directly between people, to experience what Jack talks so eloquently about just feeling that. You all talked about it in different ways, the feeling, the relationships between people. So I'm just going to end with two passages here. One is from Liberty Hyde Bailey, who founded the Cornell School of Agriculture. And he wrote this in 1915 while World War I was raging. He wrote a book called The Holy Earth. Beautiful book. So 1915, and this is because of what Cinzia said. Cinzia mentioned farmers who farm to sell their food versus farmers who farm to eat their food, or farmers who farm to tend the earth, all right? So on that theme, Liberty Hyde Bailey, 1915. To farm well, to provide well, to produce it oneself, to be independent of trade so far as this is possible in the furnishing of the table. These are good elements in living. And in this day, we are rapidly losing all this. Many persons already have lost it. Many have never known the satisfaction of it. Most of us must live from the box and the bottle and the tin can. We are even feeding our cattle from the factory and the bag. The farmer now raises a few prime products to sell, and then he buys his food in the markets under label and tag. And he knows not who produced the materials, and he soon comes not to care. No thought of the seasons, of the men and women who labored, of the place, of the kind of soil, of the special contribution of the native earth, come with trademark or brand. And so we all live mechanically, from shop to table, without contact and irreverently. 1915. All right. Wendell Berry from an essay called In Distrust of Movements. We are involved now in a profound failure of imagination. Most of us cannot imagine the wheat beyond the bread, or the farmer beyond the wheat, or the farm beyond the farmer, or the history beyond the farm. Most people cannot imagine the forest and the forest economy that produced their houses and furniture and paper, or the landscapes, the streams, and the weather that fill their pitchers and bathtubs and swimming pools with water. Most people appear to assume that when they have paid their money for these things, they have entirely met their obligations. One way we could describe the task ahead is by saying that we need to enlarge the consciousness and the conscience of the economy. Our economy needs to know and care what it is doing. This is revolutionary, of course, if you have a taste for revolution, but it is also a matter of common sense. Thank you all for coming.